This is the last iPod Apple ever made. It's the 7th generation iPod Touch, released in 2019 with an A10 chip, a home button, and the same design they'd been recycling for years. And just 3 years later, Apple quietly discontinued it, officially ending the iPod lineup after more than 2 decades. There was no big keynote, no tribute video, just a quick press release, and a while supplies last banner, which is kind of wild when you think about it, because the iPod wasn't just another product, it was Apple. Before the Vision Pro, before the Apple Watch, before the iPhone, there was the iPod, the device that took Apple from near bankruptcy in the late 90s to becoming one of the most valuable tech companies in the world. And now it's gone. So what happened? Was it killed off by the iPhone? Did Apple just outgrow it? Or did the iPod simply become a product that didn't make sense anymore? Let's go back and figure out how Apple's most iconic product quietly faded into history. If you weren't around for the early 2000s, it's kind of hard to explain just how big of a deal the iPod was. Before streaming, AirPods, or phones that could do everything, music on the go meant carrying a chunky CD player, a pile of discs, and hoping it wouldn't skip every time you took a step. It was clunky, it was annoying, and it was nowhere near seamless. Then in 2001, Apple unveiled the first iPod, and the pitch was ridiculously simple. 1,000 songs in your pocket. That was it. That was the hook. And it worked. The first model was thick, had a mechanical scroll wheel, and only worked with Macs through FireWire. But it didn't matter. This was a clean, premium-feeling device that made listening to music feel effortless. A few years later, they made it Windows compatible. Then came slimmer models, better battery life, color screens, album art, video playback. It became the ultimate media player. And Apple didn't stop with just one model either. You had the iPod mini, which came in fun pastel colors, the Nano, which was impossibly thin, the Shuffle, which didn't even have a screen, and the iPod Classic, probably the most iconic of them all, with that click wheel and huge storage for entire music libraries. It wasn't just a successful product, it redefined portable music. The iPod made digital music feel cool. It turned Apple from a computer company into a lifestyle brand. And if you had those white earbuds in your ears, that meant something. This was the start of a new era for Apple. But ironically, it also planted the seeds for the iPod's eventual downfall. If there's one moment that sealed the iPod's fate, it was this.
An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. An iPod, a phone. Are you getting it? These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device.
That was Steve Jobs introducing the original iPhone in 2007. But what he was really doing was showing the world that the iPod had officially peaked. Because one of the 3 headline features of the iPhone was the iPod. Apple didn't pitch the iPhone as something to replace the iPod, at least not at first. It was supposed to be this all-in-one device, but the writing was already on the wall. Why carry around 2 devices when one could do it all? You had your music, your phone, your web browser, your apps, all in one touchscreen package. Sure, the iPod still stuck around for a while. Apple even released new versions after the iPhone came out. However, the iPod Classic got its final update in 2009, the iPod Nano became more of a workout accessory, and the iPod Shuffle, that turned into a tiny clip-on gadget you'd only see at the gym. Then there was the iPod Touch, the only iPod that really tried to evolve with the times. It ran iOS, it had apps, it even looked like an iPhone, but deep down, everyone knew what it really was. An iPhone without the phone part. It became a backup device, something for kids, a cheaper way to run apps without committing to a full smartphone. It was useful, but no longer essential. The iPod wasn't dying because it got worse. It was dying because everything it did, the iPhone did just better. And that shift only became more obvious as time went on. By the early 2010s, the iPod had already lost the spotlight. It wasn't the highlight of keynotes anymore, ads became more infrequent, and most people, especially young buyers, either had an iPhone or were using streaming services on their phones. But Apple didn't kill the iPod right away. Instead, they kind of just let it drift. The iPod Classic got discontinued in 2014 with no real replacement. The Nano and Shuffle quietly vanished in 2017, and that just left one model, the iPod Touch. It was still around, still technically part of the iOS family, but it hadn't been truly updated in years. There was no Face ID, no edge-to-edge screen, and there was no real push to modernize it. And then came the final update in 2019, the 7th generation iPod Touch. And well, it was underwhelming to say the least. It had the same tiny 4-inch display, same design from 2012, huge bezels, home button, lightning port, no haptic touch. The only real upgrade was the processor. Apple slapped in the A10 Fusion chip from the iPhone 7. That's it. There was no new cameras, no new screen, no bold redesign. Just a small bump to keep it technically functional. It felt like Apple was only keeping it around to fill in a weird niche. It was a cheap iOS device for kids, a test device for developers, a placeholder, but not something anyone really wanted anymore. And then, in May 2022, Apple finally made it official. The iPod Touch was done. The iPod line was over. There was no goodbye video or tribute, just a sentence on Apple's website saying that the iPod had been discontinued and that the spirit of iPod lives on in every Apple device that plays music. Which, sure, it was kind of true, but it also felt like Apple wanted to quietly walk away from it, like they didn't want anyone making a big deal out of its absence. As much as people loved the iPod, it was kind of obvious that it couldn't last forever. Not because Apple messed up or people stopped caring about music, but because the world around it changed. Streaming replaced libraries, phones replaced standalone gadgets, and when your phone can already do everything an iPod can, plus take calls, send messages, and run basically every app you would ever need, what's the point of carrying around a second device just for music? The iPod was designed for a different era, one where you would download songs from iTunes, where syncing your music library was something you actually had to do, where you'd scroll through tracks with a click wheel and organize playlists on your computer. And to be fair, all of that made sense back then. It was part of the experience. But once music becomes infinite, when Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube made it so that you could just play any song at any time, the whole idea of owning music on a little brick in your pocket just didn't hit the same. It went from feeling revolutionary to feeling like extra work. Apple knew this, and to their credit, they didn't try to force the iPod into a future it didn't belong in. They let it fade naturally. No flashy redesigns, no weird hybrid devices, just a slow wind down as newer products such as iPhones, AirPods, Apple Music took over. The iPod wasn't discontinued because it failed. It was discontinued because it succeeded. It did everything it needed to do, and then the world moved on. But what do you think? Would you like to see Apple bring back the iPod in some form or another? Also, if you've made it this far into the video, subscribing to the channel would be greatly appreciated. You may have watched a bunch of my videos in the past and not even realized that you're not subscribed yet. But with that, thanks for watching.